Medusa, the handmaiden of Athena who was destined for chaos. Part 1. The Beginning, a beauty bound to Athena. Long before Medusa became one of the most feared figures in Greek mythology, she was not a monster. She was a young woman, beautiful, devoted, and, according to later traditions, closely associated with Athena, the goddess of wisdom, strategy, and divine power. Imagine her life before the snakes, before the stone statues, before the severed head became a symbol of terror. There was no battlefield, no curse, no prophecy announcing her destruction. Only the quiet world of a temple dedicated to one of the most powerful goddesses in Olympus. Medusa was said to possess a beauty so extraordinary that people could not look away. Her appearance attracted admiration wherever she went, and eventually, her beauty became impossible even for the divine world to ignore. But beauty, in Greek mythology, is rarely simply a blessing. It can become a weapon. It can become a curse. And sometimes, it can become the reason the gods decide that a mortal woman must suffer. Medusa's greatest mistake may not have been arrogance. It may have been simply being noticed. In the version of the story most familiar today, Medusa served Athena and lived within the goddess's sacred sphere. Her role was not one of power. She was not a warrior. She did not command armies. She did not challenge Olympus. She belonged to a world of devotion and ritual. And that is precisely what makes her story so tragic. Because the life Medusa expected to live was ordinary by mythological standards. Serve Athena. Protect the sanctity of the temple. Remain faithful to the goddess. Live quietly beneath divine protection. But Olympus was never a safe place. The gods were powerful, but they were also jealous, passionate, unpredictable, and often cruel. And when beauty becomes the center of divine desire, ordinary lives can be destroyed in an instant. The turning point came when Poseidon, god of the sea, noticed Medusa. Poseidon was not simply another god. He was one of the three great rulers of the cosmos, alongside Zeus and Hades. His power was immense. His temper was legendary. And his desire for Medusa would ultimately collide with the sacred authority of Athena. This is where Medusa's peaceful existence begins to collapse. But before we judge her fate, we must ask a more disturbing question. What happens when a mortal becomes trapped between two gods? Because in the world of Greek mythology, mortals rarely win such conflicts. They become the price. Part 2. The body of the story, desire, divine power, and the fall of Medusa. The story becomes darker when Poseidon enters the picture. According to later versions of the myth, Poseidon desired Medusa. The circumstances differed depending on the ancient and later sources, and the details of what happened inside Athena's temple are not consistent across every tradition. But one theme remains powerful. Medusa's fate became connected to a conflict involving divine desire and Athena's sacred space. In some retellings, Poseidon violates Medusa within Athena's temple. In others, the story is interpreted differently. But modern audiences often encounter the version in which Medusa is portrayed as the victim of Poseidon's assault. And this creates one of the most emotionally devastating questions in the entire myth. If Medusa was the victim, why was she punished? Why would Athena, goddess of wisdom and justice, turn against the woman who had supposedly suffered? The answer may reveal something deeper about Greek mythology itself. The ancient gods were not necessarily embodiments of modern morality. They represented forces: power, war, desire, wisdom, nature, chaos. And when these forces collided, humans could be crushed beneath them. In the familiar retelling, Athena transforms Medusa. Her beautiful hair becomes a mass of living snakes. Her appearance becomes terrifying, and her gaze gains the power to turn anyone who looks directly into her eyes to stone. The transformation is not merely physical. It is symbolic. The woman who was once admired because of her beauty becomes feared because of her appearance. The woman whose beauty attracted attention becomes a creature that no one dares to look at. The woman who once lived among others is pushed into isolation. This is the moment Medusa's tragedy becomes something much greater than a simple story about a monster. It becomes a story about identity. Imagine waking up one day and discovering that the person you once were has been erased. Your face is no longer beautiful. Your presence no longer inspires admiration. People no longer approach you. They run. They scream. They attack. And worse, anyone who looks directly into your eyes dies. Medusa's new power is also her prison. She cannot simply return to society. She cannot walk into a city and live normally. She cannot even meet someone's eyes. Her greatest weapon guarantees her loneliness. Eventually, Medusa retreats to a remote place. There, the monster of legend is born. But perhaps we should ask, did Medusa become a monster, or was she turned into one? That distinction changes everything. For generations, audiences have been taught to see Medusa through the eyes of the hero. Perseus sees a dangerous creature. The gods see a problem. The people see a monster. But almost nobody asks what Medusa saw when she looked into the world. Perhaps she saw betrayal. Perhaps she saw fear. Perhaps she saw the remains of the life she had lost. And perhaps, most tragically of all, she saw herself becoming the very thing everyone believed she was. This is where the mythology becomes psychologically powerful, because Medusa's snakes can be interpreted as more than a supernatural punishment. They can represent the transformation of beauty into fear. Her petrifying gaze can represent the distance created between a traumatized individual and society. Her isolation can represent the consequence of being permanently marked by something she could not control. And her reputation as a monster can demonstrate how history is often written by those who survive. Then comes Perseus. The young hero receives a seemingly impossible mission: bring back the head of Medusa. At first glance, this sounds like a classic heroic quest. A dangerous monster is terrorizing the world. A brave hero must destroy it. But there is something unsettling about the assignment. Perseus cannot simply fight Medusa. He cannot look at her directly, because one glance means death. So he receives divine assistance. Athena provides a polished shield, allowing Perseus to see Medusa's reflection rather than her actual face. Hermes provides additional divine help in some traditions. The gods equip the hero. The mortal becomes armed with divine technology, and Medusa becomes the target. Think about the irony. Medusa was once associated with Athena. Now Athena's assistance helps Perseus kill her. The same divine world that once surrounded Medusa becomes part of the machinery of her destruction. Perseus approaches the sleeping Medusa. He does not look directly at her. He watches her reflection. Slowly, carefully, silently. And then, he strikes. The blade cuts through her neck. Medusa dies. But this is where the story takes one final, extraordinary turn. From Medusa's severed body emerge Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, depending on the tradition. Even in death, Medusa's story continues to produce something extraordinary. Her blood becomes powerful. Her severed head becomes a weapon. And the image of her face becomes the famous Gorgonian, a symbol used to ward off evil. The woman who was feared becomes a protector. The monster's face becomes a symbol against monsters. And that contradiction may be the most fascinating part of Medusa's mythology. Her death does not erase her power. It transforms it. Perseus carries her head. Kings fear it. Enemies are turned to stone. And eventually, the head is associated with Athena herself. The goddess places Medusa's image upon her shield or aegis. Think about that image. The woman who supposedly violated Athena's sacred world becomes, after death, an emblem carried by Athena. The monster becomes a symbol of divine protection. The victim becomes an icon. The condemned woman becomes immortal. And suddenly, the story becomes impossible to interpret as simply good versus evil. Because who exactly was the villain? Was it Medusa? Was it Poseidon? Was it Athena? Was it the gods themselves? Or was the real villain the system of divine power that allowed a mortal woman to be destroyed by conflicts she never had the power to control? That is why Medusa remains relevant thousands of years later. Her story is not powerful because she was a monster. It is powerful because we can no longer be certain that she was one. Part 3. The End. Monster, Victim, or Something More. Medusa's story begins with beauty. It ends with a severed head. Between those two moments is an entire tragedy. A woman associated with a goddess. A woman noticed by a god. A woman caught in a conflict between divine powers. A transformation. An exile. A hunt. And finally, death. But mythology rarely gives us the luxury of a simple ending.